Hello and welcome to this video on an introduction to data analysis and pandas. So we want to start thinking about how can we look at data analysis in Python. So up until now we've dealt with a relatively small amount of data, we've dealt with individual variables, perhaps a list or a tuple, but we've not looked at anything at scale. And we see Python being used in industry at scale at companies like these companies, so GSK, Instagram, Spotify, FedEx, and many, many more companies all use Python for their data analysis. And we know that they do that because Python's quick, because it compiles on the go, and because of all the documentation that's out there to help them. But one of the other reasons that they do it is because of all the libraries that exist within Python. So a library in terms of software development is a collection of resources that can be used by the software developer. So typically that is pre-written code and behaviours, functions, documentation, things that's been created to save you having to do it yourself. So when we look at functions and we write our own functions so that we can repeatedly use them, libraries are typically collections of functions that exist, except this time we don't need to write the function. So the Pandas library is the one that we are going to use. It's a library that was created for data manipulation and analysis, originally for financial data. So it's been open source since 2009. So what that means is there have been volunteers providing ideas, suggestions, creating new functions, fixing bugs, and that's people from all across the world. So because Pandas is open source, it means that there's a lot of documentation available, and you can see that some of that documentation at the GitHub link, but effectively what I want to show with that link is when we call a function from Pandas, it's contained on that GitHub, so that repository of code. And you can see over time, the lots and lots of contributions that have been made through the years on data analysis. And each of these contributions is effectively something new being added. So massive user base, massive development base, and lots of documentation available. So that's why we've used Pandas. There's a reference guide available online, and that reference guide has a list of all of the different functions, all of the different variables that are contained within it. Now, if you know what you're looking for, that's a great place to go. If you don't, then just start with Google. It will probably lead you there eventually. But typically when you're searching these libraries, if you don't know the name of the function that you're looking for or the action that you need it to take, it can sometimes be a bit difficult to get to it. But that's where the official record is kept, is on the Pandas website. There's lots of different advantages of using libraries or data analysis libraries in general, but in particular, advantages of using Pandas: it's very efficient when you deal with large data sets. It's got lots of features. We'll see a small fraction of those, but all you have to do is scroll through that reference guide and you'll see that there's a lot more. We can achieve a lot without writing a lot of code. So for example, if we want to create a chart or a plot, it's one line of code. Imagine we had to create all of the code to do that by ourselves rather than just calling a function. And you can go through that GitHub and try and find, take a function that you've used, go through that GitHub and try and find the actual code that sits behind the function name. And you'll be surprised there's a lot in there, but what we're doing is just using a very small amount of it to achieve a lot of stuff. Pandas also lets you join and merge multiple data sets, which not all libraries do, and it's simple to do that within Python, and it's relatively simple to create visualizations of the data, either within a data frame, as we'll see later, or within plots. But there's always downsides to whatever choice you make. So the disadvantages for Python, Pandas, sorry, the compared to Python, the syntax is very slightly different. For the introduction level material, it's noticeable, but not much of an issue. But it does mean that it can cause some compatibility issues as we become more advanced. The basics learning curve is quite straightforward, but that learning curve gets quite steep. But it is totally worth it in the long run if you need something for data analysis. Pandas typically deals with one-dimensional or two-dimensional data, so if you're trying to do something with a three-dimensional matrix, then you need to use something like NumPy for that, which has got more complicated data structures within it. So while there are disadvantages, it's worth it in the long run in terms of the efficiency, the speed, and the effectiveness of using the Pandas library. Within Pandas, I said we can use one-dimensional or two-dimensional data. So one-dimensional data is called a series, and that might be, for example, a single list. So let's say a list of temperatures. A data frame would be two-dimensional data, so that's like a table, or more like an Excel sheet. So if I had my original column of temperatures, if I had a second column with locations that those temperatures were recorded, that would put me into a data frame because I have two columns. I'm going to record a separate demo of me going through some Python and Pandas implementation just directly inside a notebook, and so there'll be a separate video for the demonstration. And finally, I just want to highlight a few different data analysis libraries that you can use. Obviously, we've decided that we're going to use Python, Pandas for this one. If you want to do more complicated 3D matrices, then NumPy is the way to go. But there are various other libraries. All you have to do is search Python Data Analysis Library and you get a huge list. But they have different specialties, so perhaps they're better at different types of data, perhaps they use different data structures. They can be compatible with multiple languages, not just Python, often C or C++ as well. And some of them have specialties like drawing charts, so the Matplot one, for example, is about charts. So many different things that if you decide to follow data analysis into something more complex, you may find that Pandas isn't the library that you need, but a Google of your requirements should point you towards something different if required.